My family thought leaving me with Grandpa on Christmas was harmless, just another favor from the daughter who never said no. I was Coralie Whitcomb, a 36-year-old hospice nurse in Greenwich, Connecticut, and for years they used my compassion like a spare key. While my parents and golden child brother spent Christmas in Europe, I found only a cold note on the kitchen counter, a half-empty fridge, and my 84-year-old grandfather sitting by the fire like he had been waiting for me. What they didn't know was that Grandpa Ellis had been watching everything, and inside his quiet old house was a $20 million trust that was about to choose the one person they treated like free help. Chapter 1. My name is Coralie Whitcomb, and on December 20th, 2024, I drove back to my family's house in Greenwich, Connecticut, after finishing another overnight shift at Harbor Light Hospice Center. I was 36 years old enough to know better than to expect much from my family, but still tired enough to hope that Christmas might soften people who had spent years using me like a spare key. I had worked through the blue-gray hours before sunrise, changed linens, adjusted pillows, checked morphine logs, and sat beside a woman who was afraid to close her eyes because she thought no one would be there when she opened them again. By the time I left the hospice parking lot, my hands smelled faintly of sanitizer and peppermint lotion, and my body had that hollow ache that comes after too many nights of pretending exhaustion is professionalism. I told myself the house would be warm. I told myself Mom would have made soup. Dad would be in his study, pretending not to watch football too loudly. Preston would say something smug about Manhattan traffic, and Grandpa Ellis would be in his chair by the fire, waiting for me with one of his old newspapers folded across his knee. I did not expect perfect. I just expected people. But when I turned into the driveway, the first thing I noticed was the silence. My father's black Mercedes was gone. My mother's Lexus was gone. Preston's Audi was gone too, the one he always parked at an angle like the driveway was a courtroom and he had just won an argument. The garage windows were dark. No porch music, no kitchen light, no shadow moving behind the curtains. Only the chimney was alive, sending a thin line of smoke into the cold December air. I sat in my car with both hands on the steering wheel and felt something in my chest tighten before I even understood why. I opened the front door with my old key. The house smelled like wood smoke, lemon polish, and the expensive candles my mother only lit when guests were coming. The entryway was spotless, too spotless. No coats thrown over chairs, no luggage by the stairs, no sound of my father clearing his throat from the den. Grandpa Ellis was in the living room, sitting in his maple rocking chair beside the fireplace. He was 84, wearing the same gray flannel shirt he had owned for at least 15 years, his hands folded neatly in his lap. He looked smaller than I remembered and somehow steadier too, like the house had emptied itself around him and he had chosen not to move. He did not look surprised to see me. "Hello, Coralie," he said. "Hi, Grandpa. Where is everybody?" "Europe," he said. Just that. One word, Europe. I walked into the kitchen before my legs could decide not to. On the counter, beside the fruit bowl and my mother's spotless ceramic butter dish, there was a folded yellow note with my name written across the front in Diane Whitcomb's sharp, slanted handwriting. I opened it. "Martin, Preston, and I are in Europe from December 20 to January 1. Stay with Dad and make sure he takes his medications. Pills are in the cabinet above the sink. Cardiology appointment details are in his wallet. Groceries should last a few days. Emergency number is on the refrigerator. Diane." That was it. No please. No thank you. No love, Mom. Not even a sentence pretending this had been discussed with me. I read it twice, because sometimes humiliation takes a second pass before it becomes clear. My family had planned an entire European Christmas, bought tickets, packed bags, arranged rides, probably argued over dinner reservations and hotel upgrades, and not once had anyone thought my time deserved a question. They had not forgotten me. That would have hurt less. They had assigned me. I looked in the fridge. A carton of eggs, half a loaf of bread, 2 chicken breasts, a bag of spinach already beginning to wilt, 3 apples. Enough food for a person trying not to be accused of neglect, not enough for anyone who had actually cared. When I walked back into the living room, Grandpa Ellis was watching me. Not with pity, not with embarrassment, with attention. "Coralie," he asked, "have you ever been angry with them?" I almost laughed, but nothing came out. Anger felt like a luxury I had never learned to afford. I thought about every phone call that began with my mother saying my name like an instruction. I thought about every plan I had canceled because Grandpa needed a ride, Dad needed help with paperwork, Mom needed someone practical. Preston had something important. I said the only honest thing I had left. I got used to it. Grandpa Ellis looked at me for a long time. The firelight caught the edges of his glasses. "Then this week," he said, "we begin." I did not know what he meant. I thought he meant medication schedules, glucose checks, low sodium seals, doctor appointments. I was a hospice nurse. That was the box my family had placed me in so cleanly that even I had started living inside it. But his voice did not sound like a man asking to be cared for. It sounded like a man who had been waiting for the right witness. I went upstairs to my old bedroom, the one my mother still called yours, even though half the closet held winter coats and Preston's old law school boxes. The bedspread was the same pale blue one from college. The bookshelf still held paperbacks I had not touched in years. On the desk, centered so carefully it looked placed for a ceremony, was a white envelope for Coralie. "Open on Christmas Eve, Grandpa's handwriting." I picked it up. It was light but not empty. Something thin was inside. A card maybe, a check maybe, a warning maybe. I set it in the drawer without opening it and told myself I was too tired to make mysteries out of paper. But my hands shook when I closed the drawer. This was not the first time my family had left me behind. It was only the quietest Thanksgiving 2019 should have taught me. I had requested time off months in advance for a cabin trip in the Blue Ridge Mountains with friends I had barely seen since nursing school. It was nothing extravagant. A rented cabin, cheap wine, hiking trails, a fireplace that did not come with family obligations. 3 days before I was supposed to leave, my mother called and said Grandpa could not be alone. "He had a cough," she said. "You know how older people can decline so fast." I asked if he had seen a doctor. She sighed like my question was proof of my selfishness. "Coralie, you are the nurse. We should not have to explain this to you." So I canceled. I lost $740 on the deposit and gave up 3 holiday shifts I had promised myself I would not take. Grandpa had a mild cold and was better by Saturday. My parents and Preston spent Thanksgiving in Turks and Caicos. My mother posted a beach photo with the caption, "Family is everything." I stared at those 3 words for 10 minutes. Then there was July 2022, my father's 59th birthday in Napa Valley. They booked wine tours and a resort with white umbrellas and stone patios. When I asked where I was supposed to stay, my mother blinked like I had said something awkward at a funeral. "Dad has a cardiology follow-up," she said. "You are the one who understands all that medical stuff." The appointment with Dr. Priya Nair lasted 40 minutes. Grandpa was stable. His heart sounded good. Dr. Nair told him to keep walking and reduce salt. By the time I got him home, my family was already posting photos from a winery, my father holding a glass of Cabernet, Preston grinning with his arm around both parents. No one called to say there was still time to fly out. No one even pretended. And then May 2024. My best friend Mara was getting married in Newport, Rhode Island. I had bought a dress, booked a hotel room, wrapped a gift by hand. The night before I was supposed to leave, my father told me Preston needed to attend a networking event tied to one of Fairmont Harbor Insurance Group's biggest partners. Apparently, Preston's future mattered more than my friendship. Mom told me to call Mara and say Grandpa was sick. He was not sick. She does not need every detail, Coralie. I left Mara a voicemail at almost midnight. She texted back 2 words, "I understand, no heart, no promise to talk later." Just the clean little sentence people use when they are too hurt to fight. I lost more than a wedding that weekend. I lost the last friend who still believed I would choose myself. The worst part was that I knew exactly why I kept doing it. I had been trained. Preston had a future. I had responsibility. If Preston was busy, he was building something. If I was busy, I was being selfish. My mother used to say my patients could wait, but family could not. As if dying strangers were appointments, and the people who raised me were emergencies. My father liked to say I knew how to handle these things. Preston would shrug and say I was better at this stuff anyway. Better at giving up. Better at showing up. Better at disappearing without making anyone uncomfortable. That morning before I drove to Greenwich, I had been sitting beside Lorna Bellamy at Harbor Light Hospice Center. She was 79, a retired librarian with silver hair and hands so thin the veins looked drawn in blue pencil. Her room was quiet except for the oxygen machine and the soft rattle of sleet against the window. She had no children at her bedside, no husband, no sister. Just me, adjusting her blanket and pretending my own feet did not ache. She had opened her eyes and looked at me with startling clarity. "Does your family know what kind of heart it takes to sit with people at the end?" I had smiled because hospice nurses learn to smile when the truth is too large for a room. I did not answer. Now, standing in my parents' kitchen with Diane's note in my pocket and Grandpa Ellis waiting by the fire, I finally understood why I had not answered. Because the truth was no. My family did not know what kind of heart it took. They only knew it was useful. I took the note from the counter, folded it carefully, and slid it into my hoodie pocket instead of throwing it away. Grandpa watched the movement from his chair. "Good," he said softly. "Some paper should be kept." I looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time that night I wondered how much he had seen. Not just tonight, not just this Christmas, all of it. I went back upstairs later and opened the desk drawer just enough to see the white envelope still waiting there, for Coralie. Open on Christmas Eve. The house was quiet around me, but it no longer felt empty. It felt like something had been set in motion before I ever turned into the driveway. And for the first time in years, I had the strange, unsettling feeling that my silence had not been invisible after all. Chapter 2. The next morning, I woke before the sun because my body still belonged to the hospice schedule. At Harbor Light, I could wake from a dead sleep if a call bell chimed 3 rooms away. In my parents' house, there was no call bell, only the old furnace knocking softly behind the walls, and Grandpa Ellis moving around downstairs much earlier than any man described as too fragile to be left alone should have been moving. I found him in the kitchen with a screwdriver, the toaster turned upside down on a dish towel. "Grandpa, what are you doing?" "Fixing breakfast," he said, as if that explained the loose screws beside his coffee mug. You know, most people just buy a new toaster. Most people throw away things that still work because they never learned patience. He did not look up when he said it, but I felt the sentence land somewhere deeper than a kitchen appliance. I washed my hands, checked his glucose, wrote the number in the notebook I had started the night before, then set out his blood pressure pill, his metformin, and the small aspirin Dr. Priya Nair still wanted him taking. I checked the dates on the bottles, reorganized the pill case my mother had filled incorrectly, and called Dr. Nair's office to confirm his cardiology appointment. By 7:30, I had oatmeal on the stove with cinnamon instead of salt, blueberries rinsed in a bowl, and Grandpa Ellis sitting at the table reading the financial section like a retired man with no secrets. That was what confused me most. He did not act sick. He did not act helpless. He walked slowly but not unsteadily. He remembered his medication schedule better than my mother did. He knew exactly which cabinet held the extra lancets, which grocery store carried the low-sodium broth he liked, and which neighbor had borrowed his leaf blower in October and not returned it. "You're not as fragile as they make you sound," I said before I could stop myself. He turned a page of the newspaper. "No, but being underestimated can be useful." I looked at him then. His gray hair was thinner than it had been when I was a kid, his hands more knotted, but his eyes were clear. Too clear. After breakfast, I cleaned up while he finished repairing the toaster. When it clicked down and the coils glowed orange, He looked almost satisfied. "Tell me about Harbor Light," he said. I almost gave him the version I gave relatives, the polished explanation about comfort care, symptom management, dignity. But something about the quiet kitchen made lying feel disrespectful, so I told him about the real version. The night shifts that stretched until sunrise, the patients who apologized for needing help, the adult children who stood in hallways because stepping into the room made death too real, the wives who asked me if it was okay to sleep for 20 minutes after staying awake for 2 days, the men who reached for my hand because the hand they wanted was already gone. Grandpa listened without interrupting. When I finally stopped, he folded the paper carefully. "You do work most people only understand when they need it." I laughed once, softly. "My family understands it just fine when they need me to do it for free." He did not smile. He just looked at me with an expression I could not name. That is not the same thing. Later that morning, Janine Porter called from Harbor Light. I stepped into the mudroom because my first instinct was always to protect other people's grief from becoming background noise. Janine's voice was gentle in the way hospice voices get when the news is already finished. "Lorna passed around 6:20, peacefully. She had your blanket over her knees." I closed my eyes. "She wasn't alone?" "No, Mateo sat with her after you left, and she left something for you at the nurse's station. A card." I thanked her and hung up, but I sat in my car for 10 minutes after driving to Harbor Light to pick it up. The card was small, cream-colored, with Lorna's careful handwriting inside. "Thank you for not letting the room feel empty." I cried without making noise. That was another skill hospice had taught me. How to break quietly and still be useful 5 minutes later. When I got back to the house, Grandpa Ellis was in the living room. He glanced up from his chair and saw my face. "You lost your patient." I nodded. "Her name was Lorna Bellamy. Was she afraid sometimes and you stayed?" "As much as I could." He looked toward the fire. "You did not have to love her to honor her." "No," I said, my voice thinner than I wanted. "I just couldn't stand the idea of her leaving this world feeling abandoned." The room went very still. Grandpa did not say anything for a long time. Then he nodded once, as if I had confirmed something he already suspected. The first Europe photo appeared that afternoon. My mother posted it from Paris. She was sitting at a restaurant table in a black dress, candlelight shining off her earrings, my father beside her with one hand around a wine glass, Preston leaning back with the kind of smile he used when he wanted strangers to know he belonged somewhere expensive. The caption read, "Christmas is about making memories." I was standing at the kitchen counter, splitting Grandpa's pills into morning and evening doses. On December 23rd, my mother video called from Paris. I answered because some habits survive even when your pride does not. Her face filled the screen, perfectly made up, a hotel lamp glowing behind her. "Oh good, you're home. Can you check my closet?" "Hi, Mom." "Grandpa is fine, thanks for asking." She waved that away like I was being difficult. "Yes, of course. Listen. I think I left my cream cashmere wrap in the back of the closet, and I need you to see if my diamond earrings are in the vanity drawer. Also, if Aunt Vivian stops by, please put out the fresh hand towels in the guest bath. The green ones look tired." Grandpa was sitting at the kitchen table 3 feet away, eating soup I had made from scratch because the groceries Diane left were almost gone. He heard every word. "Mom, do you want to talk to Grandpa?" "Oh, we'll call him later. The time difference is terrible. Just text me about the earrings, okay?" "Thanks, sweetheart. You're a lifesaver." The call ended, a lifesaver. In my family, that word did not mean cherished. It meant available. I set the phone face down on the counter. Grandpa Ellis said nothing. He only reached for his water glass, but his hand paused halfway there, and I saw his jaw tighten. The next day, Preston posted from Zermatt, snow behind him, ski goggles on his head. Finally, a real holiday. I was in a cardiology waiting room with Grandpa Ellis, filling out a form because my mother had written his medication list wrong. Dr. Priya Nair examined him for 40 minutes, listened to his heart, checked his blood pressure, and said he was doing well for 84. Stable. Alert. No reason he could not travel locally, walk daily, make his own decisions. Grandpa thanked her, then looked at me. "Remember that wording," he said as we walked out. "What wording?" "Make his own decisions." I wanted to ask why, but my phone buzzed before I could. A few days later, my father posted from Rome, the three of them raising glasses in front of a plate of pasta I knew cost more than my weekly groceries. "Family time is priceless," Aunt Vivian commented within 10 minutes. "Where is Coralie?" My mother replied, "She wanted a quiet Christmas with Ellis. She's always been better with his medical routine." I stared at that sentence until the letters blurred. She had rewritten me in public. Not left out, not assigned, not used. I had wanted this. I took a screenshot. Grandpa, sitting beside me in the passenger seat, noticed. "Keep that too." I turned the screen toward my lap. Why? Because people who lie casually often forget paper does not. That afternoon, I walked past his home office and noticed the door was open. It was almost never open. On the desk sat a Navy folder from Klein Estate and Trust Council in Stamford. The label on the front was printed in black ink. "George Ellis Whitcomb Revocable Living Trust, Fourth Amendment Confidential." I stopped. The words seemed too formal for the old room with its shelves of paperbacks and framed photos. I did not touch the folder. I did not step inside. I only stood there long enough to understand that Grandpa had meant what he said about paper. When I turned to leave, he was in the hallway. "You always stop at other people's boundaries," he said. I swallowed. I wasn't trying to snoop. I know, that's the point. On Christmas Eve, after Grandpa went to bed, I sat at my old desk and opened the white envelope. Inside was a check made out to me for $5,000 and a letter in Grandpa's handwriting. He wrote that he had seen Thanksgiving 2019, Napa in 2022, Mara's wedding in Newport, and now Christmas 2024. He wrote that I was not weak and I was not foolish. I had been taught that love was something I earned by being useful. He wrote that I had cared for him when no one was watching and no reward had been promised. Then came the sentence that made me cover my mouth with one hand. "Kindness is not supposed to make you family property." I read it 3 times. At the bottom, he told me to be present on January 3, when Nora Klein would come to the house for a trust meeting. He underlined trust. He wrote that this was not a will reading, because he was very much alive, very much competent, and very tired of being treated like a burden by people waiting to inherit from him. I went downstairs with the letter in my hand. Grandpa was awake in his chair as if he had known I would come. "What are you hiding from me?" I asked. He looked at the fire, not hiding, waiting for the right person to look. I sat across from him. "How much money is in that trust?" He did not hesitate. "Just over 20 million, depending on the market." For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. $20 million did not belong in the same sentence as his old flannel shirts, his repaired toaster, his 2006 Camry, the television with one stubborn green line down the side of the screen. Grandpa watched my face carefully. "That money showed me a great deal, Coralie. Not because I spent it, because I did not." My throat felt dry. "What happens on January 3? He leaned back in the rocking chair, the firelight moving across his glasses. "You will learn that the money is not the most important thing I kept." I waited, but he did not explain. He only looked at me with a sadness that felt older than Christmas and said, "I am not leaving you just an inheritance. I am leaving you a choice." Chapter 3. I did not sleep much after that. I kept hearing the word choice in Grandpa Ellis's voice, soft and steady, as if it were not a gift but a burden he had wrapped carefully and placed in my hands. For the next week, the house stayed quiet. I cooked, measured medication, checked his blood pressure, and pretended I was not counting down to January 3. Grandpa did not mention the trust again. He read his paper, fixed a loose hinge on the pantry door, and took slow walks around the block when the sidewalks were clear. Every ordinary thing he did made the secret feel stranger. A man with just over $20 million in a trust should not have been wearing socks with one thin spot at the heel. On January 1, my family came home. I heard them before I saw them. Wheels bumping over the front threshold. My mother's laugh, bright and performative. Preston complaining about customs at JFK. My father saying something about how New Year's Day traffic out of Queens was criminal. They walked in carrying duty-free bags, winter coats, European chocolate, and the relaxed entitlement of people who believed the house would simply reset itself around them. Preston dropped his leather duffel near the staircase and glanced at me. Is there coffee? Not hello? Not Merry Christmas. Not thank you for staying with Grandpa. My mother kissed the air near my cheek, then looked past me toward the kitchen. Did you refill Dad's pill organizer? I left the list on the counter. My father took off his gloves and looked toward Grandpa's chair. He give you any trouble? Grandpa Ellis sat beside the fireplace, one ankle crossed over the other, watching them like a judge who had not yet called court to order. He was fine, I said. Nobody asked how my Christmas had been. Nobody asked if Grandpa had been lonely. Nobody asked if I had slept, eaten, worked, cried, or spent Christmas Eve opening an envelope that made my entire childhood rearrange itself in my mind. Grandpa let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. On January 3, Nora Klein is coming here, he said. All of you will sit down. My mother froze with one hand still in her coat sleeve. Dad, is this about your will? Grandpa's eyes did not leave hers. Not my will, my trust. Preston's face changed first. He was a corporate attorney in Manhattan, and certain words had weight for him. Trust was one of them. What trust? Grandpa picked up his newspaper. You'll find out on Friday. The next 2 days felt like waiting for weather that had already broken somewhere far away. My mother tried to act casual, but she cleaned when she was anxious, wiping counters that were already clean and rearranging flowers that had already died. My father made several phone calls from his study with the door closed. Preston stopped asking me for coffee and started watching me as if I had become opposing counsel. On January 3rd, Nora Klein arrived at 10 in the morning. She was in her late 50s, with silver brown hair cut neatly at her jaw and a navy wool coat that looked expensive without trying to announce it. She carried 2 leather document cases. Behind her came Elliot Marsh, Grandpa's CPA, a quiet man with wire rim glasses and a folder thick enough to make my father's jaw tighten. Aunt Vivian arrived 5 minutes later. She hugged me longer than usual. I'm glad you're here, she whispered. I did not know whether she meant in the room or in the family. Both felt uncertain. We gathered in the dining room, the same room where my mother used to tell me not to set my elbows on the table. The same room where Preston had been praised for every internship, every promotion, every polished achievement, while my work was treated like a useful personality trait. Nora placed a stack of folders on the table. Before we begin, she said, I want to be very clear. This is not a probate proceeding. This is not a will reading. Mr. Whitcomb is alive, competent, and present. We are reviewing the 4th Amendment to the George Ellis Whitcomb Revocable Living Trust. Preston leaned back slightly. Competent, according to whom? Nora did not blink. According to 2 independent evaluations. Dr. Priya Nair, his cardiologist, and Dr. Malcolm Reed, a geriatric psychiatrist. Both reports are included in the record. Grandpa sat at the head of the table, calm as stone. Elliot Marsh opened his folder next. He explained the money in a dry, careful voice. Grandpa had owned 14 rental duplexes in Hartford and New Haven, properties he bought piece by piece in the 1980s and 1990s, long before my parents started acting as if his life had shrunk to pill bottles and doctor appointments. He sold them gradually between 2014 and 2020. After taxes, the proceeds went into index funds, municipal bonds, CDs, and other conservative investments. As of the most recent valuation, Elliot said, the trust assets total approximately $20.2 million. My mother made a small sound. My father stared at Elliot like he had miscalculated gravity. Preston looked at Grandpa, then at me, and in his eyes I saw the first spark of accusation. Nora continued. Under the 4th Amendment, Coralie Whitcomb is appointed co-trustee and distribution advisor for specified trust provisions. She will control $13.6 million through the trust structure. My ears rang. $13.6 million. Not in a lottery way, not in a fantasy way. In a folder on my parents' dining room table, spoken by a lawyer with a pen in her hand, Nora went on. $3.5 million will establish the Harborlight Caregiver Excellence Fund, supporting hospice nurses and palliative care workers. $2.1 million is designated for medical charities. $1 million remains reserved for Mr. Whitcomb's elder care needs. My father finally spoke. And us? Nora looked at him. You, Diane, and Preston have no guaranteed inheritance under the amended trust. The room went still. My mother's hand went to her mouth. Preston sat forward. I'm concerned about undue influence, he said, his voice suddenly smoother, colder. Coralie had unusual medical access to Grandpa. She understands vulnerability better than most people. I felt the words like a slap wrapped in legal language. Nora opened another folder. That concern was anticipated. She laid documents on the table one by one. The capacity evaluations, the signed amendment, Grandpa's handwritten notes, screenshots of Europe posts, the medical appointment records I had handled for years, text messages from my mother asking me to cancel plans, emails from my father forwarding responsibilities without asking. And then last, the yellow note Diane had left on the kitchen counter. My mother stared at it. That was just an instruction note. Grandpa's voice cut through the room, quiet but sharp. No, that was how you told my granddaughter her time did not belong to her. Diane's eyes filled instantly. Dad, that's not fair. What was not fair, he said, was watching her become invisible because invisibility was convenient for all of you. Nora turned a page. There was a previous trust structure. It provided more generously for Martin, Preston, and Coralie. Mr. Whitcomb changed it after documenting a repeated pattern from Thanksgiving 2019, July 2022, May 2024, and December 2024. My father's face flushed dark red. You documented us? Grandpa looked at his son. I remembered you. That was worse than shouting. You did not lose money because of Coralie, Grandpa said. You lost it because I saw how you treated her when you thought no one important was watching. Preston's mouth tightened. So that's it? We're cut out and she gets to sit there like some moral authority. Nora lifted one hand. There is a conditional provision. Everyone turned toward her. Martin, Diane, and Preston may each become eligible for a conditional distribution of up to $350,000. It is not guaranteed. My mother's tears paused. Eligible how? Nora read from the document. Each of them had to complete 200 hours of supervised non-medical patient support at a hospice, nursing home, or elder care facility. They had to complete a background check and HIPAA orientation. They had to sign releases allowing attendance and professionalism summaries to be sent to Nora and to me. They had to write a handwritten apology of at least 700 words naming specific harm. They had to attend 4 family therapy sessions with Dr. Rosalind Mercer, if I agreed. And then came the sentence that made Preston laugh once under his breath. Final distribution remains at Coralie Whitcomb's sole discretion based on her good faith assessment of whether the requirements reflect genuine accountability or mere technical compliance. Preston turned to Grandpa. So she gets to judge us now? Grandpa did not look away. No, she gets to do what you made her do for years, carry the responsibility. Only this time, she has the power too. My mother began crying fully then. Coralie, you can't do this to your mother. I wanted to say I was not doing anything. I wanted to say I had not drafted the trust, signed the amendment, hidden $20 million, or abandoned anyone at Christmas. But the old training rose in me anyway. Comfort her. Soften it. Make the room easier for everyone else. Then I felt the yellow note in the folder on the table, like a hand pressing me back into my chair. My father called it humiliating. Preston went silent. But his silence was not surrender. It was calculation. I could almost see him rearranging the problem, looking for leverage, loopholes, pressure points. I looked at Grandpa Ellis. He looked tired, but not uncertain, and I realized I did not feel happy. Not even close. I felt heavy. All my life, responsibility had been handed to me without authority. Now Grandpa had given me both, and the weight of it scared me more than their anger. When the meeting ended, Nora handed me a copy of the trust amendment. The pages were clipped cleanly, the language formal and exact. On the final page was Grandpa's signature, steady and dark in blue ink. I ran my thumb near the edge of the paper without touching the signature. For years, my tears had not stopped them. My silence had not changed them. My exhaustion had not moved them. But this paper had made the entire room stop breathing. Chapter 4. In the days that followed, nobody apologized. That was the first thing I noticed. Not one person came to my room, or called me into the kitchen, or even sent a careful text that began with, "Maybe we should talk." They did not ask what it felt like to spend Christmas in a house they had emptied on purpose. They did not ask why Grandpa Ellis had changed his trust. They did not ask what I had carried all those years. They changed strategies. Preston moved first, because Preston always moved first when something threatened his control. He did not call me a thief in public. He was too polished for that, too trained by Manhattan conference rooms and corporate liability language. Instead, he sent messages to relatives that sounded almost reasonable. "I'm concerned about undue influence. We need an independent review." Coralie had unusual access because of her medical background. Grandpa may not understand the full implications. It was clever because it made me sound dangerous without making him sound cruel. It turned my work as a hospice nurse into a weapon. The same job my family had used for years whenever they needed free caregiving was suddenly proof that I knew how to manipulate an old man. In private, he was less careful. A cousin I barely knew forwarded me a screenshot. Preston had written that I had used hospice skills to make an old man dependent. He said I knew how to read weakness. He said Grandpa had been isolated with me for too long. He said someone should consider adult protective services. I read that line 3 times, sitting in the Harbor Light parking lot after a 12-hour shift, and for 1 second, I wondered if defending myself would make me look guilty. Then Nora Klein called. "I sent him a letter this morning," she said. "What kind of letter?" "The kind that reminds attorneys they are not exempt from defamation law." Her voice was calm, almost dry. She explained that the trust had been signed properly, that Grandpa had capacity evaluations from Dr. Priya Nair and Dr. Malcolm Reed, that the 4th Amendment had been executed before I knew the details, and that there was no evidence of coercion. If Preston continued spreading false claims, all future communication would go through counsel. "What if he contests it anyway?" I asked. "He can try," Nora said. "Trying and winning are not the same thing." Preston stopped using my name in group messages after that. But he did not stop hating me. He just learned to put his hatred in better clothes. My mother came next. Dion did not threaten court. She threatened love. Her voicemails came in clusters, usually late at night or early in the morning when she knew I might be too tired to guard myself. "A daughter doesn't do this to her mother. I carried you, Coralie. You only have one family. Money is changing you. I don't know when you became so cold." I never answered, but I listened. That was the humiliating part. I listened to everyone, sometimes standing in my kitchen with my coat still on, sometimes in my car outside Harbor Light, sometimes sitting on the edge of my bed like I was 12 years old again, and had forgotten to be the kind of daughter who made life easier. One night, after she left a message crying so hard, I could barely make out the words, almost called her back. My thumb hovered over her name. My body remembered the old job before my mind could stop it. Comfort her. Soften it. Make the room easier. Make yourself smaller so no one else has to feel guilty. Then I opened Grandpa's letter again. "Guilt is not love. Love does not require you to disappear." I read that sentence until my breathing slowed. After the threats and tears came compliance. Martin chose an elder care facility in New Haven, supervised by a volunteer coordinator named Graham Bell. He arrived on time, wore pressed shirts, shook hands firmly, and treated each shift like a board meeting he intended to survive. Graham's first report said Martin was polite, punctual, and reluctant to engage in direct companionship. That was a generous way to say my father preferred paperwork to people. Once, Graham assigned him to read the newspaper to a retired mechanic whose son had not visited in 7 months. Martin sat for 20 minutes, read the headlines in a flat voice, then asked if someone could sign his sheet. Deanne volunteered in the family waiting area at Harbor Light. She looked beautiful every time. Cashmere sweaters, pearl earrings, makeup perfect enough for a luncheon. Janine Porter told me she was pleasant when staff were watching, but she complained about the disinfectant smell, arrived late more than once, and asked whether weekend hours could count double. She passed out tissues from behind the desk, but never once sat beside a family waiting for bad news and asked if they needed water. Preston signed up for an activity program at a nursing home outside Stamford. His reports were the cleanest, which somehow made them worse. He was punctual. He was professional. He followed policy. He did exactly what was required, not 1 minute more. Graham noted that Preston left immediately after each shift and once described the work in the break room as emotionally inefficient. When Nora sent me those summaries, I stared at the phrase for a long time. Emotionally inefficient. It sounded exactly like my brother. Through Aunt Vivian, I learned why the $350,000 mattered so much to people who had always acted like money was beneath discussion. My father's mortgage was larger than he admitted. My mother owed social club dues and had committed to 2 nonprofit galas she could not quietly back out of without losing face. Preston's Manhattan rent, loans, suits, dinners, and image cost more than his pride could cover. They were not poor. They were worse than poor in their world. They were overextended and terrified of being seen, so they worked the claws like a project. 4 therapy sessions with Dr. Rosalind Mercer were scheduled in the spring. I agreed because Grandpa had asked me to look for change, not hide from discomfort. In the first session, Martin sat with his hands folded and said, "I prioritized opportunity. That's what fathers do." "For Preston," I said. He paused. "For the family." I wanted to ask when I had stopped being part of that word, but Dr. Mercer wrote something down, and I let the silence answer for me. In the second session, Diane cried into a tissue and said, "I'm sorry you felt alone." I looked at her. "That is not the same as saying you left me alone." She cried harder, but she did not correct herself. In the third session, Preston asked, "If all requirements are completed, will Coralie approve the distribution?" Dr. Mercer looked at him over her glasses. "That question may be important to examine." Preston leaned back and said nothing else for 20 minutes. By the fourth session, something in me had stopped hoping. I asked the only question that still mattered. "If the money disappeared tomorrow, would you still want this conversation?" No one answered right away. That silence told me more than any apology could. The letters came in June. My father's was handwritten, but it read like an executive memo. He acknowledged that certain decisions may have caused inconvenience. He emphasized that he had completed the required volunteer hours. He used the phrase "moving forward" 3 times. My mother's letter was 6 pages long and somehow still avoided the truth. She wrote that mothers make mistakes, that love is complicated, that a mother's mistakes should not cost her daughter's love. She never wrote, "I left you behind." Preston's letter was the neatest. He blamed career pressure, family expectations, networking obligations, the competitive nature of corporate law. He never said he was sorry for taking my place. He never said he was sorry for calling my compassion manipulation. By then, I had moved into a small rented apartment in downtown Greenwich, not fully furnished yet, still smelling faintly of paint, cardboard, and a life I had not quite learned how to claim. I told myself it was temporary until the trust process became clearer, until the year ended, until I understood what I was allowed to want without apologizing for it. But some nights, walking from the kitchen to the bedroom without anyone calling my name from another room, I felt something unfamiliar, peace with no permission attached. In late December, Aunt Vivian forwarded me an email. The subject line was blank. The message was from my father to Diane and Preston, sent months earlier, right after the trust meeting. Do the hours, write the letters, sit through therapy, get the money. We only need Coralie to believe enough. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after reading it. I did not cry, I did not shake, I did not even feel surprised. The truth had finally stopped hiding behind manners. I forwarded the email to Nora. 2 days later, she sent me the full packet: volunteer reports, therapy attendant summary, the 3 apology letters, my father's email. On top was a note from Grandpa Ellis in his steady blue handwriting. Do not reward performance. Look for change. I spread everything across my table in the apartment I was still learning to call home. Outside, downtown Greenwich glowed with winter lights. Inside, the papers lay in neat stacks, each one proof of effort, and almost none of them proof of remorse. For most of my life, I had said yes because saying no felt like breaking something. But looking at those files, I finally understood that some things had been broken long before they reached my hands. Chapter 5. By the end of December 2025, I knew the packet almost by touch. The volunteer reports, Dr. Rosalind Mercer's summary, the 3 apology letters, and my father's email had been read so many times that the pages no longer felt like documents. They felt like witnesses. Do the hours, write the letters, sit through therapy, get the money. Those 11 words did what a year of apologies had not done. They made the decision simple, even if they did not make it easy. A few days before the final meeting, I drove to Grandpa Ellis's house in Greenwich. The winter light was thin and silver, the kind that made every bare tree look drawn in pencil. His home health aide had just left when I arrived, one of the services paid through the Elder Care Reserve in the trust. Grandpa was in the living room, exactly where this had all begun, wearing a navy cardigan over one of his old flannel shirts. He looked older than he had the year before, but not confused. Never confused. I sat across from him with the packet on my lap. He did not ask what I had decided. That was one of the things I loved most about him by then. He had given me power, but he never tried to steer my hand once it was mine. Instead, he asked, "Are you deciding out of anger?" I looked down at my hands. "I don't know." He nodded as if that was the only honest answer. "If you want to punish them, wait," he said. "If you want to tell the truth, speak." I carried that sentence with me into December 30th. The final decision meeting was held at Klein Estate and Trust Council in Stamford. Not a courthouse, not a judge's chamber, just a conference room with a long walnut table, a pitcher of water nobody touched, and windows looking out over a parking lot glazed with old snow. Nora Klein sat to my right. Grandpa Ellis sat beside her. Aunt Vivian came too, quiet and steady in a gray coat, her hands folded around her purse. Across from us sat Martin, Diane, and Preston. My father looked thinner, or maybe just less inflated by certainty. My mother had dressed like she was attending a funeral, black dress, pearls, eyes already wet. Preston wore a dark suit and the blank expression he used when he wanted everyone to remember. He was an attorney before he was a son or a brother. Nora opened the meeting with the same calm precision she had used a year earlier. The Care Accountability Clause does not require Coralie to reward completed tasks. It requires her good faith assessment of whether the requirements reflected genuine accountability. Under the 4th Amendment, her decision is final. My father leaned forward immediately. I completed the hours. His voice had that CFO edge, as if life were a spreadsheet, and he had met the deliverables. Deanne pressed a tissue to her mouth. I wrote the letter. I went to therapy. What else do you want from your mother? Preston looked straight at me. If you deny distribution after we complied, then this was never about accountability. It was humiliation. For a moment, I could feel the old version of myself trying to rise. The daughter who softened rooms, the sister who swallowed insults, the nurse who knew how to make pain quieter, even when it was not hers. Then I opened the folder. Grandpa didn't ask me to reward completed tasks, I said. He asked me to look for changed hearts. No one spoke. I turned first to my father. "Martin, you completed 202 hours of supervised patient support. Graham Bell wrote that you were punctual and polite." He also wrote that you avoided emotional contact with residents whenever possible, requested paperwork instead of companionship, and told a staff member you weren't built for this kind of thing. My father's jaw tightened. That was taken out of context. It was not, I said. You spent years treating my time like it had no cost because Preston's career mattered more. You sent me to doctor appointments, made me cancel trips, made me miss weddings, and never once asked what I lost. Even in your apology letter, you wrote like a man completing a requirement. You did not ask me to forgive you. You asked the trust to pay you. I took a breath. My decision for your conditional distribution is $0. His face went pale, not with sorrow, but calculation collapsing. I turned to my mother. Diane, you completed 204 hours. You wrote 6 pages. You cried in therapy. But you still never said the words that mattered. You said you were sorry I felt alone. You never said you left me alone. Her tears spilled over. Coralie, I am your mother. I know, I said, and my voice almost broke there. That is why it hurt so much. She covered her mouth. You used family as a word that meant I owed you something. Family helps family, but only when you needed me. When I needed to be included, family was suddenly expensive, inconvenient, or too complicated. Being my mother does not give you permission to turn me into unpaid help and call it love. She shook her head, whispering my name. My decision for your conditional distribution is $0. Then I looked at Preston. He did not cry. Preston never wasted energy on an emotion he could turn into an argument. You completed exactly 200 hours, I said. Not 1 minute more. You followed policy. You stayed professional. And then you emailed Nora asking when the distribution could be processed. That is a reasonable administrative question. No, I said. It is the only question you cared about. His eyes hardened. You used legal language to make me sound dangerous. You turned hospice nursing, the work you all used whenever it served you, into evidence that I manipulated Grandpa. You did not come to therapy to understand me. You came to find out when the money would be released. I closed his folder. My decision for your conditional distribution is $0. The room went completely still. Deanne began crying harder. You've become so cold. I looked at her, and for the first time the accusation did not enter me. No, I said, I've become unavailable. My father pushed back from the table. This is vindictive. Nora's voice cut in before mine could. The decision is made under the terms of the trust. Any further accusation should be directed to this office in writing. Preston stood so fast, his chair scraped the floor. We're still your family. That sentence would have destroyed me once. It would have sent me running back, apologizing for pain I did not cause, trying to mend a table they had never saved a seat for me at. But not that day. No, I said. You are people I share blood with. Family is what someone does when there is nothing to gain. Grandpa Ellis did not smile. He only closed his eyes for a second, as if the truth had cost him something too. And I understood then that this was not the kind of victory that made you feel powerful. It was the kind that made you finally stop bleeding in places no one else could see. They had been given a year to learn what they had mocked: caregiving, presence, patience, responsibility. They did the hours, signed the forms, sat through therapy, and wrote the letters. But they treated accountability like a toll road, something you pay to reach the place you actually want to go. So they received what they had given me for years. Nothing. In early 2026, after Nora documented my first personal distribution under the trust and the year-end decision was complete, I bought a 2-bedroom condo in downtown Greenwich. No mortgage. No guest room reserved for people who only came when they needed something. Just a quiet kitchen, a small balcony, and windows that caught the morning light. I kept working a few shifts a week at Harborlight Hospice Center. People asked why I still did it when I no longer had to. The answer was simple. Money had changed what I could tolerate, not who I was. The first scholarships from the Harborlight Caregiver Excellence Fund were awarded that spring. Janine Porter cried when the first recipient, a nursing student specializing in palliative care, said she wanted to make sure no one died feeling like a burden. Mateo Alvarez hugged me so hard I almost laughed. Nora stood near the back, smiling quietly. Grandpa Ellis sat in the front row with both hands on his cane, looking prouder than I had ever seen him. That fund was not just money. It was proof. Proof that work like mine mattered. Proof that the people who sit beside the dying refill the water cups, call the families, hold the hands, and remember the names deserve to be seen. Around that time, Caleb Hashu came into my life. He was 39, an ICU nurse, and he had the calm eyes of someone who had also learned how fragile ordinary days could be. He never asked how much money was in the trust. After one long shift, he simply looked at me and asked, "Have you eaten yet?" It should not have undone me, but it did, because he was not asking what I could do for him. He was asking whether I had been cared for. One evening, I sat with Grandpa Ellis by the fireplace, in the same room where I had found him the night my family left for Europe. There was no yellow note on the counter anymore, no phone buzzing with guilt, no voice in my head telling me to shrink, so someone else could feel comfortable. Grandpa looked over at me. "Are you happy, Coralie?" A year earlier, I would have said I was used to things, used to being left, used to being needed, used to being the person everyone assumed would stay. This time, I told him the truth. "Yes," I said, "I think I finally am. I did not become cruel. I did not become greedy. I did not become the villain they needed me to be so they could survive their own guilt. I simply stopped giving my life to people who only loved me when I was useful. And if you were in my place, after they completed every requirement but never truly changed, would you have given them the money, or would you have given them exactly what they gave me for years? Nothing.